want to thank everybody for joining us for the Get the Lead Out Caucus's virtual briefing on attacks on safe drinking water and specifically on the lead and copper rule improvements. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We've got a really great panel, and I don't want to talk too long. We'll let people hear from them and save plenty of time for questions. But wanted to open up with one of our caucus co-founders and clean water champion, Rep. Dingell. Take us away.
Thank you, Andrew. And I also want to say my partner and the leader in a lot of this work is, and we do a lot of, they call us double trouble. We do a lot of work together, is Rashida Tlaib, who is attending our dear friend, the former chair of the Natural Resources Committee's funeral in Rose in Arizona. And I know she's going to try to pop on, but she didn't know what the schedule was going to be. So her spirit is here with all of us. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us this afternoon, and to the NRDC for helping us organize this briefing. I do a lot of work with them, and they just care about so many issues. And all the experts, thank you. It's good to see. There are just a lot of people. Mona, it's great. I want to thank everybody on the panel. I won't get in trouble here, but I will get in trouble. Clean and safe drinking water is a basic human right. And the science is just really, really clear. No amount of lead in drinking water is safe, period. No state knows this better than Michigan. Dr. Mona has educated all of us, has taken care of so many kids, has seen the devastation that it has caused, and seen a generation of children poisoned in a city. And because of what happened in Flint, we know better. We know what we all are in this fight to protect. Last fall, we managed to, we applauded the Biden administration's final lead and copper rule improvements, which would require drinking water systems across the country to identify and replace lead pipes within 10 years. And also have much more rigorous testing and improved communication with communities. When it was happening in Flint, people didn't know what was happening. They didn't know. So all of that was in the bill. We also secured $50 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law to improve our nation's drinking water, including $15 billion specifically to replace lead pipes, which wasn't enough, but it is a beginning, and it really, really matters. Now we got a problem. There are Republicans in Congress who want to repeal the lead and copper rule improvements and reverse, I'm not going to call it progress. Kids were drinking lead. No child in America should be exposed to lead, period. And under the Congressional Review Act, EPA could never issue a substantially similar rule in the future. That is the biggest threat to children across this country. Water is a basic human right. Every child should be able to drink clean, safe water. And so I want you to think about what that would mean to communities. It would just be absolutely devastating. There are millions of people across this country that don't even know that they're drinking lead. That's what happened in Flint. They didn't know they were drinking lead. I've been with Dr. Mona. I've been in Flint. I've met in other cities now where I've been with parents who are crying with me. They don't know what's going to happen to their children. She had to keep me from taking one child and just taking him. I was going to fly him to a different hospital. But when you're with these kids and you're with these parents that love their children, we got to do something. We have to keep any other community from being poisoned the way the children of Flint were. So we can't allow that to happen to any community. I'm going to do everything I can fighting with Rashida and everybody on this panel, and I hope all of you to make sure we don't roll back the work that we've done, but more importantly, that anybody would roll back a rule that would keep our community from poisoning its children. So thank you for the efforts of everybody here, and thank you for knowing how important this issue is that you're participating in today's briefing. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Rep. Tlaib is unfortunately not going to be able to join us. She's still at Rep. Grijalva's funeral, but obviously sends her best wishes, and we'll continue organizing together. Double Trouble will stay as at the forefront of this issue. So I want to keep things moving along. We're going to start with our first panelist, who really kind of needs no introduction, but Dr. Mona Hanna, really one of the key people who helped expose the Flint water crisis and document the health impacts on children and folks in the Flint community. And she's going to give us an overview of how lead affects human health. And we're just so glad that you could join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here with all of you. My huge kudos and gratitude to the Double Trouble. Michigan has these two amazing congresswomen, Representative Tlaib and Representative Dingell, who have been fighting for not just kids in Michigan, but literally kids across this nation. So as Representative Dingell mentioned, I was just kind of accidentally in the middle of this emblematic environmental and public health crisis, which happened in Flint, Michigan. I'm a pediatrician, so I have the greatest job in the world. I get to take care of kiddos. And so much of my job is to make sure that they're, healthy today, giving them their vaccines, which are really important, so a little digression, making sure that they're growing and developing great, but also making sure that they have the brightest future possible. Yet there was something in our water that people didn't know that was in our water because it's colorless and it's odorless and it's tasteless. There was lead in our water from improper treatment, improper surveillance, improper a lot of things that was threatening the tomorrows of an entire population of children. We brought that to light, and when bringing that to light, we realized through these amazing partners here and many others that OMG, this is a problem everywhere. Lead in our drinking water delivery system is ubiquitous. So there's about 11 million homes, we think, have a lead service line. And even more homes that inside their house have lead in what we call the premise plumbing, which is what's inside the plumbing inside your house, because we were very slow as a nation to restrict the use of lead. And when I first heard that there was lead potentially in the water in Flint, I freaked out as a pediatrician. I'm gonna tell you why I freaked out and why lead is such a no-no. It is a potent, irreversible neurotoxin. So what does that mean? It means it's really strong. It means you can't take away. There's no like magic pill or antidote that takes away lead exposure. You know how many times I have wished for a antidote to take away this exposure, but it doesn't exist. And it's a neurotoxin, which means it attacks your nervous system. And that is most critical for little kids, developing children, where your nervous system is just growing and growing and multiplying and making new connections. In that first year of life, your brain actually doubles in size. And when you have an exposure to a neurotoxin in this really neurodevelopmentally vulnerable window, this kind of prenatal, early childhood window, that impacts you forever. So what does lead do? So it goes into your body, it ends up in your bloodstream where it just lives for a short amount of time. It has a half-life of what we talk about like for about a month. And then it gets deposited in your brain and in your bones, and it can actually last in your bones for decades. And then it can come back out of your bones in like periods of what we call bone turnover, like if you're pregnant or if you're going through different hormonal changes or osteoporosis, it comes back out of your bones into your bloodstream and causes neurotoxicity all over again. And that neurotoxicity, once again, attacks your nervous system. So what we see in children is impacts on cognition. So lead actually lowers IQ levels. We see impacts on behavior, leading to things like attention deficit disorder, impulse disorders, conduct disorders. We also see hearing issues and growth issues in children. But the really kind of devastating thing about lead is that it impacts you for a really long time. So even kids exposed to lead can manifest years later with all of these, academic problems, learning problems, behavior problems. But lead's also been linked to things like early dementia and high blood pressure and kidney disease. And a huge kind of burden in our society is cardiovascular disease. It's been linked to things like high blood pressure, hypertension. So this is entirely devastating for children and families for their entire life course. So then what are we supposed to do? What is the recommendation by the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, the World Health Organization? The recommendation is that children and everybody should not be exposed to lead, that there is no safe level of lead. And what we should be doing is this concept of primary prevention, which means we find lead in the environment and we remove it in the environment before kids can ever be exposed. Because remember, it's devastating for children. There is no antidote. We can't take it away. It's potent and irreversible. So we have to do everything we can to, once again, find it in the environment and remove it. And that's exactly what the lead and copper rule improvements was intended to do. It was intended to find the lead pipes, because people don't even know they have lead pipes. So to create a really good inventory, to do a better job sampling, and to work to get rid of those lead pipes. So that, coupled with the Infrastructure Act, gave us finally the tools to follow the science and to protect our children. Both of these things were what we call primary prevention, and really a success, and one of the lessons that we finally learned from Flint. So once again, lead exposure is preventable, the treatment is prevention, and this lead and copper rule improvement and so many wonderful things that we did in the last administration, including the Infrastructure Act and all the environmental justice work, was proactive, preventative, science-based, child-centric work to get rid of the lead. I will stop there, but happy to take questions after.
Thank you, Dr. Mona. We'll just keep rolling right into the lead and copper rule improvements, and I'm going to turn it over to Eric Olson and Matthew McKenzie from the NRDC.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have some slides I'm going to show, and really want to walk through what some of the significant problems are right now with lead and what this rule is intended to do and how it's going to actually help us in protecting really millions of children and adults from pollution of their water supplies with lead. So I'm hoping you can see my slides. Can you see them? Yeah, okay. So basically, as Dr. Mona just said, we really want to protect those who are most at risk. Those are children and fetuses. Those are Black and minority populations that tend to have higher exposure levels. Those are people with pre-existing conditions like kidney disease, high blood pressure, and heart disease. So one of the issues you keep hearing about is that there are lead service lines, and these are the majority of lead exposure from tap water comes from lead service lines. This is the pipe that runs from the water main out in the street to the home, and it conveys drinking water, of course. The latest EPA estimate is somewhere north of 9 million of these, but those numbers are still a little bit iffy because the inventories so far are incomplete and in many cases, not very effective. So we mapped recently with my colleague, Matthew McKenzie, who's going to show some maps a little bit later. We mapped EPA's most recent data on where the lead pipes are and how many there are. And you can see that they are spread, all 50 states, US territories, all have these lead service lines. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some much more granular data that we've been able to generate. So if you look at this map, this is again based on EPA's data, a map we generated that shows you the states that have the highest numbers of lead pipes. If you look at it on a per capita basis, actually it's a little bit different. And there are some red states that have pretty high per capita rates of lead pipes in their state. For example, Iowa and a few other states, Missouri, have really high per capita numbers. Why do we have so many lead service lines? Well, there was a ongoing campaign from the lead industry starting in the late 1800s all the way through the first half of the 1900s to tout how wonderful lead pipes are for safety and for health. And they actually ran what they called a modest campaign to try to convince municipalities, trade associations, water utilities, and even plumbers unions and local officials to use lead pipes. And in fact, generally these lead pipes were installed, these lead service lines were installed as a requirement in most cities. And in fact, Chicago, for example, required lead pipes until 1986 when they were banned by Congress in 1986. So if you go back and look at the history, these were installed at the requirement of the municipalities, the water utilities, or at least they were explicitly approved by the utilities. And what was the result of this? Well, we did a study of data through 2018, finding that about 30 million people were served across the US by systems that violated the old lead and copper rule, which was pretty lax. And 5.5 million people were served by systems that exceeded the old action level for lead, which was 15 parts per billion, which by no means is protective, but what that tells you is we've got a lot of people that are affected by lead in their homes. We did a poll that looked at what the public thinks about and what voters think about whether these lead pipes should come out. And the bottom line is that by far, Democrats, Republicans, independents, college educated, non-college educated, everybody supports lead service line replacement within 10 years, or a rule that requires that. It was about 9 in 10 voters, including, as I mentioned, the vast majority of independents and Republicans supported replacing lead pipes within 10 years. So EPA did in October, as Dr. Mona mentioned, issue the lead and copper rule improvements. The key requirement was that most systems are going to have to replace their lead pipes in 10 years. They dropped this lead action level from 15 parts per billion down to 10. They included a requirement that if there were repeated high levels of lead in the water system, eventually the water system is going to have to provide filters to homeowners. This is happening right now without that requirement in Denver, which is distributing water filters to everybody that has lead pipes. And under this rule, eventually that's going to kick in and be a requirement in a few years. In addition, it improves monitoring, improves inventories of lead pipes, and requires better control of corrosive water. As I mentioned, most utilities are going to have to replace the lead service lines if they control the lead service line, which is, I think Julian is going to talk about this issue as an issue in the litigation that's pending. And also, there are some extensions. So cities with a huge number of lead pipes and high concentrations, like Chicago, for example, is going to get over 20 years to replace all of its lead pipes. The rule also makes modest improvements in public notification and transparency. But honestly, this is an ongoing problem where we see a fair number of water utilities, frankly, not telling the truth about the lead contamination problems that they have. This is an example from here in Washington, D.C., where the city said your drinking water is safe in their annual report, yet they had really high lead levels in their water that they didn't disclose until the Washington Post ran a front page story showing that they've been hiding this fact. So the lead and copper rule improvements just have enormous benefits. And I know that you'll hear more about this, but about 1 million fewer low birth weights and complications that result from that, about 200,000 fewer lost IQ points for children, thousands fewer ADHD cases, over 1,500 fewer fatal heart attacks, according to EPA, fewer kidney, childhood development, and other issues, and the benefits just far outweigh the costs. So Julian will talk about the challenges, so I won't get into them, but there's both a legal challenge in court And as Julianne will talk about, two Congressional Review Act resolutions of disapproval. We have all heard about Flint, which was the result of implicit bias in a history of systemic racism that was built into the foundation of Flint, according to the study by the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. But Flint is by no means the only city with this problem. Similarly, in Newark, New Jersey, there was a serious lead contamination problem because of local residents and NRDC litigation and advocacy. The city moved forward, and although initially said they didn't have a problem, turned around and decided to replace all their lead pipes. They did so. 23,000 lead pipes were replaced in less than 3 years. And they hired and trained local residents, many of whom were unemployed, with new job skills to replace these lead pipes. And they're now off replacing lead pipes in other cities. Blue Green Alliance, Harley will speak about the jobs that were created as a result of this. And also, it's really important to highlight the need for additional water infrastructure funding. So the takeaways are no safe level of lead. As Dr. Mona has said, lead from tap water creates lifetime problems for kids. Some cities have already been replacing their lead pipes, and there are enormous benefits from the lead and copper rule. It's crucial for Congress to protect that rule, and we do need additional funding. We agree with Congresswoman Dingell that safe water is a right for all, including the most vulnerable, marginalized, and underserved populations. So I want to turn this over now to my colleague, Dr. Matthew McKenzie, who's going to show you a sneak peek of some these maps that we will be releasing shortly.
Dr. McKenzie, you're muted.
It looks like Representative Tlaib is here. Do we want to have her jump in?
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm going to try to do closing. So keep going. I apologize. We just finished up. It was a beautiful service, but yeah, please continue. I don't want to disrupt. And if I can do just a closing and thank everybody at the end, that's fine.
Okay,
Awesome. Thank you.
great. I'm Matthew McKenzie, Eric's colleague at NRDC, and as he said, we'll just give a sneak peek here. Our latest mapping efforts sought to translate the 90th percentile lead levels from EPA's Safe Drinking Water Information System, SIDWIS, to the geography of the political geography of congressional districts to show how many of the constituents of members of Congress are in fact impacted by these high lead levels. And so the map, the online map that we'll be releasing shortly is essentially a heat map by congressional district that shows the 90th percentile lead levels at 1 part per billion, 5 parts per billion, 10 parts per billion, 15 parts per billion. In other words, identifying these hotspots, and also shows the population affected by health-based violations. And so as we roll this out, we'll be talking about what is the overall geography that we're seeing, where are the outliers, and what does this mean for the responsibility of members of Congress to address the health challenges, the health threats to their constituents. Eric, anything else on this?
Nope, that's it. We will be releasing this, we hope, in the next week or two, and we'll also be ranking congressional districts that have the highest numbers of population served by problems with lead. So it's both violations of the EPA rule, health-based violations of the EPA rule, as well as excessive levels of lead in the water. So we can now turn it back to you, Andrew.
Thank you for that. We'll go right in to some of the threats and challenges to these common sense rules that keep us safe, and turn it over to Julian Gonzalez, Senior Legislative Counsel with Earth Justice.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for having me. I will share my screen and get right into it. Can you all see the slide? Great. So Eric briefly touched on some of the threats to the LCRI, or lead and copper rule improvements. I'm going to get one level deeper, and there are several layers of depth beyond that. And if you have questions or want to know more about any of these particular things, feel free to reach out. And we're happy to share more materials and information. Okay. So there are three main threats to the still relatively recent lead and copper rule improvements regulation. One is Congressional Review Act challenges. The second is litigation, particularly a lawsuit filed by the American Water Works Association seeking to get rid of the rule. And three is the Trump administration's potential responses to that litigation, which can also, as we'll get into, result in potentially weakening the rule or even getting rid of it. So we'll start with the Congressional Review Act challenge. As Eric mentioned, there have been two congressional resolutions filed that are CRA challenges, one from Representative Peters from Alabama and another from Representative Clyde from Georgia. Both of them are the same. They're a couple sentences long, and they seek to use the CRA to undo the LCRI. And it was mentioned earlier on the call, but it bears repeating. Any successful CRA challenge not only undoes that regulation, but prevents the issuing agencies from issuing substantially similar regulations in the future. So future administrations would likely not be able to require or to promulgate a rule which would require all lead service lines be replaced as the LCRI does. So it is a very blunt instrument. And if you're a stakeholder who has some issues with the rule, but is happy to go forward and replacing lead service lines, whether you're a local utility or a business or advocate, I can't really understate or overstate how blunt of a tool this is. Even if you have issues with the LCRI, utilizing the CRA to get rid of the LCRI is like burning a new house down because you don't like the kitchen curtains or something like that. It really leaves no space for compromise, for discussion, or for future action. So what happens if the CRA is passed? Well, we would return to the prior rule, which was called the Lead and Copper Rule Reforms, finalized during the first Trump administration, known as the LCRR for shorthand. This rule was really, really ineffective for there's enough reasons that could be an entirely different webinar, but suffice it to say for now that EPA itself has acknowledged the ineffectiveness of that rule. The two most poignant examples of that I can give you are these bullet points at the bottom of the slide. Under the LCRR, EPA's own analysis said that 95% of lead service lines would not have to be replaced. That was the impetus for the new rule, the LCRI, requiring most utilities to replace their lead service lines in 10 years. Many water systems, most even, would not have to replace any lead service lines at all under the LCRR because of just how many loopholes there are and how much weaker the requirements are in that prior regulation. There was a loophole, for example, that would allow smaller systems, which are the majority of the 50,000 systems in our country, to avoid replacing lead service lines altogether, no matter what their lead levels are, and no matter how many times they exceed EPA's lead action level. Newer protections in the LCRI, such as providing filters to homes after repeat exceedances, would be eliminated. And then, in addition to that, another sort of curveball that would result from the LCRI being rolled back and the LCRR coming back on the books is that the LCRR's compliance states also are immediately effective. There were several compliance states for last October for water utilities that the utilities didn't have to worry about because they were going to wait and prepare for the LCRI. And if the LCRR is automatically placed on the books, because again, the CRA is a blunt instrument, those effective dates and compliance dates are active. all of a sudden, and many water utilities would immediately be out of compliance. It's such an issue that the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, AMWA for short, basically the association for larger water systems, cities and things like that, they actually flagged that for their members in the newsletter recently, because if those systems are immediately out of compliance, then they become vulnerable to enforcement actions at the federal level, the local level, from citizen suits to potential litigation costs, and a lot more. So a lot of chaos would come to bear if the CRA was used to undo the LCRI. The second threat is litigation from the American Water Works Association. I won't get into too much detail on this, but much of their filed claims in the suit hinges on whether they think the rules requirements for things like replacing most lead service lines in 10 years are feasible, and whether a court would agree by that. Most of the arguments they put forward aren't particularly new. They're things that they voiced to EPA on prior occasions that EPA has really evaluated many times by now. So it a little bit was expected, even if it was disappointing. I won't go through this whole slide, but AWWA has a history of filing lawsuits whenever stronger public protections are put forward. They also have a history of often distorting data to support those legal efforts. So again, this is kind of an old playbook, but it is a threat nonetheless, because you never know how these things can proceed once they get into the courts. A lot depends on where this happens, where the court is, and things like that. So it is definitely still a threat. The final threat to the LCRI that I wanted to flag is the administration's response to potential litigation. So April 21st, y'all can circle your calendars. It's a deadline for the current administration to basically decide if they're going to defend the rule, or say they looked at the rule and actually we made a mistake and we want to change the rule. We want you to get rid of the rule. They have to tell the court, a court, what their approach is going to be regarding the rule. They could ask the court to strike down the rule, which, similar to the CRA, would send us back to older, weaker versions of the rule. They could ask to send the LCRI back to EPA, where they could attempt to change it and weaken it, although I don't know how many staff are left for them to do that. This rule is quite a beast, and it took lots and lots of staff, lots and lots of time to write. The good news is the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is the statute that sort of creates these standards like the LCRI, these treatment techniques, has what's called an anti-backsliding provision, which prevents it prevents agencies from putting forward standards that are weaker than standards that are already exist. So the idea is that our drinking water standards over time only get stronger and don't get weaker. So any attempts to weaken a rule may be challenged as violating the anti-backsliding provision. But again, in litigation, you don't always know how these things are going to play out. So there's a lot of risk there nonetheless. That's it for me. We have materials, fact sheets. We're happy to share these slides. A lot more in-depth versions of all those slides exist. So happy to share, and I'll pass it back to Andrew to keep us moving.
Thank you for that overview. We do have a question in the chat that we can maybe bring up right now, and that's just, does anyone have any intel or idea of when these CRAs might move, or if there's any support for them being brought to the floor?
Yeah, I can take that. So the window that Congress has to go through with any votes on CRA resolutions probably goes until sometime in the second week of May. We don't know the exact day. I've heard May 12th, May 13th. So they pretty much have to take the vote by then. And as you all know, as folks who work on the Hill, you know, this takes floor time just like anything else. So there's limited time to move a CRA when you have to compete with all the other legislative priorities and hearings and confirmations and things. But that being said, when these CRAs do come up, they go fast. They go through the rules committee straight to the full floor. They, you know, don't take a ton of deliberation. So just because there hasn't been any movement on this particular CRA beyond the introduction of the resolution now doesn't mean it won't happen to move at some point soon or move quickly.
Thanks for that. So our last presenter is Harley Stokes from Blue Green Alliance. And, you know, sometimes we're when the public health and environmental arguments for something aren't persuading some of our colleagues in Congress, maybe economic and job development arguments might help. So we're going to hear about some of the you know, benefits of the lead and copper rule outside of the obvious benefits to our health.
Thanks, Andy. And thank you to Representatives Tlaib and Dingell for hosting this briefing. So I'm Harley Stokes. I'm a Senior Policy Manager with Blue Green Alliance. If you're not familiar with us, if I can get my slides to keep going. Give me 1 second. Let's try it one more time. All right. There we go. So if you're not familiar with us, BGA is a coalition of labor unions and environmental orgs working at the policy intersection between good jobs and a clean environment. We have a coalition of 15 organizations, including NRDC and UA, the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Union, which is relevant for this conversation. So I want to hone in a little bit on this 10-year time frame that the LCRI would require for most systems and why it's so important and how we sort of frame the economic benefits, including job creation, as well as health benefits monetized, and what we need to do to fund the replacement of all those lead service lines. So NRDC and UA did a report with E2 a few years ago that looked at how many jobs would be created within a 10-year timeline if we replaced all lead service lines. And they found that in direct jobs, that would be 27,000 annually. So 27,000 per year for 10 years. So direct jobs would be things like a licensed plumber. It would be things like operating engineer who does the operates the heavy equipment. It would be laborers or construction workers. And then you also have all of the indirect jobs, which would be over 29,000 per year for 10 years. That would be things like workers who manufacture those pipes, workers who are at the restaurants who serve lunch to those on the job site. All of those are included in the indirect jobs number. So that breaks down to 56,000 per year for 10 years. So just thinking about all of the different districts and states, I mean, you saw the map that Eric showed us, all the different districts and states that have to remove these lead service lines and what that will do for the economy. So, and put it in another way, it's 38.3 billion in labor income, 11.7 billion in taxes, and 53.9 billion in additional value to the economy. The Harvard School of Public Health did this great study that tried to quantify the health benefits that come with removing all lead service lines. And it can be really hard to quantify all of the societal and health benefits. So it's pretty amazing that they were able to do this, but also keep in mind, it's probably even greater than these numbers because it is hard to quantify. So when they looked at this analysis that said, okay, like here's the cost of removing, it's probably about 60 billion, maybe a little less. But when you look at all of the savings from the improved health benefits, that it's 786 billion. So that's more than 13 times your return on investment. They also looked at just one of those health benefits, which was lower cardiovascular disease, and found that for every single lead service line replaced, that $22,000 of societal benefits were generated. So I just want to frame a little bit like what funding needs to look like in order for us to accomplish this 10-year time frame. So as Representative Dingell said, we got this amazing down payment in the bill for 15 billion over 5 years. We're now in the third round of funding, so FY24. 14 states already have that money in hand. However, that leaves 36 states plus Puerto Rico at risk of all of the different funding freezes and different issues happening at the administrative level. We saw yesterday that the state of Massachusetts does in fact have a funding freeze and was expecting their lead service line replacement money, and it is being withheld by the federal government. So this is something that we're definitely keeping a close eye on. Also, the FY25 funding is also supposed to start rolling out around May, starting in May, all the way through October. So we also have to keep a close eye on whether that will also be affected. And then not only are the programmatic funds at risk, but already the staff that was put in place to support technical assistance, support communities figuring out how to logistically put these projects together, how to find other funding, they are already being attacked. So if you're familiar with the TICTACs, the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers that was supposed to support communities draw down DOE and EPA money, we know that they've received stop work orders and that their funding is frozen. So I know you all know those things, but just to bring it to the point around lead service lines, that's directly impacting communities. And when we're thinking about future funding, we still have about 45 billion that we need to appropriate to the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund in order to get this job done. I also want to lift up a relatively new grant program called the Innovative Water Workforce that helps build capacity. It goes towards training and apprenticeship, and that needs to be reauthorized and appropriated as well. That's particularly important because in the next 10 years, we expect about a third of the water workforce to retire. So that's something that we are pushing for potentially in the WRDA 26. And then also just to tie in what's happening with the administration, we all heard that Administrator Zeldin said they were going to cut the EPA budget by 65%. So then, of course, that means additional staff reductions as well as programmatic cuts. So these are all things that we're paying attention to and want to make sure that you all were aware of. And on that happy note, I will leave it there, but happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Harley. I think Rep. Tlaib is boarding her flight right now, but might be able to hop on.
Yeah, we haven't taken off yet. Thank you all so much for your patience. This is a really important caucus in the work that we do. Just in closing and as short is, I want you all to know when we started to get the Let Out caucus, it was bipartisan. Congressman Pete Meyer and I talked and said the one thing that we could all agree on is the issue around clean water and access to clean water was a crisis nationally. In every corner of our country, there is a community that's being impacted. And so I hope we can continue to use these briefings to show, and I'm looking forward to NRDC's, that's why I put in the chat, to send to every member of Congress and making sure that we reach out to every single one that works on water issues and try to make this a priority issue and moving with the urgency that it needs. A lot of what was discussed here, and I'm sure Congresswoman Dingell have expressed this as the co-chair, is the rolling back. And it was so hard under both administrations to even get where we got with the EPA. So you all know, and moving a lot more, a lot quicker in trying to get more complete replacement of lead lines. But again, we know it's not just lead anymore. It's so many other contaminants. And again, moving with the urgency. But I'm hoping this briefing and for all the staff that is on these briefings to know, this is information that we can start sharing. Please, if your member knows of a colleague, we're already reaching out to one that did a really powerful testimony about clean water, a Republican. And so again, we want to get this to become more of a national issue, not a partisan issue. And the crisis that it is. But I want to thank all the presenters. Of course, Dr. Mona, thank you so much. I still have your lead pipe, and you can tell them all the story about that one. I got to return it to you. It is in a bag, and I don't touch it. But I really appreciate all of you, doing the work. I think that I wish that we could have gotten our various administrations to move on. What you're being able to produce, again, helps people understand that we need to move move much quicker. And I'll leave you with this. I always say to people, our children can't learn if they're being poisoned. I know that's harsh to say, but it's true. Our kids are being exposed by contaminant water all over the country. And again, any amount of lead, any amount of these contaminants hurts them. So again, really appreciate all of you. And thank you for your patience of me getting on. It was a beautiful ceremony. It was for Raul Garava, who was a big supporter of the work that we're trying to do. Literally all the wreaths in front of his, in front of the family and everything was environmental justice for all. It was beautiful. So again, thank you all so much. And I yield back to you, Andrew.
Thank you for that, Rashida. I just wanted to make sure we had one additional question in the chat, and I just wanted to make sure folks got to maybe discuss it a little so people could see. I'll ignore the very off-putting go green and go white back and forth that's in there, but we can move on from that. But the question was, how effective is pipe relining technology with making lead service lines safe to use? Is that a technology that can be used instead of full replacement? And it looks like Eric and Mona both might have some comments on that.
Mona, do you want to go first? Yeah, I mean, basically, it's being pitched by some companies as a great solution, but EPA's looked at it. They do not allow it under the rule as a technology to replace a lead service line. There are several reasons for that. One is it's really not proven that it's going to last long. Another is that a lot of the chemicals that are used, for example, epoxies, may put off toxic chemicals into the water, including BPA. So it's, for those reasons and others, which I'm happy to chat with anybody about, they really have not been viewed as a great alternative. And the best alternative is to replace the lead pipe with copper pipes, not plastic pipes, by the way. And that's something that we've been pushing for a while, along with a lot of other groups, health groups and others, that the real solution here is just to replace those pipes. And that's what most cities are doing, is replacing them with copper. That's what they did in Newark, and that's what they're doing in most cities now. Mona, I'm sure you have additions.
Yeah, I would agree. Usually the most common question is about PVC or plastic, and the answer is once again, no. Copper is by and large a nutrient. If it does leach out, it's okay for most folks. And that's kind of the most durable and best practice.
Thank you. We did have a new question here. Could Ms. Stokes quickly re-review the freezes and stop work orders currently occurring?
Sure. So one that I was referencing was just the executive order to unleash American energy. So that was the broad one that was saying temporarily freeze bill and IRA funds until they're reviewed. There was also executive orders specifically around EJ, either programming or staff. And so the example that I gave The acronym is called TICTAC, so it's Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. That was passed through the IRA, and those centers, which are based in EPA regions, I believe, are meant to help communities draw down funds either from DOE programs or EPA programs. And so there's an example from the Great Lakes TICTAC where they were supporting them in lead service line replacement. And our best intel is that those TICTACs, so throughout the country, basically got the stop work orders, presumably through that executive order, and don't have, like, their funding is frozen. That's our latest intel. So that's happening. And then I also highlighted at the end that, you know, we anticipate that EPA is going to cut a lot more because they were saying that they're going to cut 65% of their budget. So just inevitably that will be programmatic and that will be staff cuts. So that's what I was referring to.
I want to jump in. I had the same thought Dr. Mona had. She just pasted a link in the chat. Basically, there was a press statement from the Massachusetts government about lead service line replacement money funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law that was delayed. And we're still learning about all of the consequences of the various freezes and things like that. That right now, this is probably only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what kind of impacts these freezes and other orders have had on water infrastructure, including lead service line replacement funding. To use another example, in a lot of instances, communities have to provide funding upfront and then get reimbursed for federal funding. And if the federal government and the various funding streams within it are in flux, you might be hesitant to make that upfront investment. So we're really still sorting out a lot of the fallout. So there's a good chance that more lead service line replacement projects have been impacted by all this stuff.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that. And I just put in the chat the link that shows it's state by state, the different EPA buckets of money. So you can sort it by lead service line replacement and see the 14 states that were already awarded in FY24. And you can see whether your state is yet to be awarded. So if you look at it, Massachusetts, under that status, it says yet to be awarded. And then Eric had flagged this press release from Massachusetts. So that's our worry, that all those states that say not yet awarded are threatened because the administration may be freezing them. And that's what it looks like they're doing based on the Massachusetts example that Julian just talked about.
Yeah, can I just add one additional point? And this builds on what Harley was saying. A lot of smaller and disadvantaged communities really have a hard time applying for this federal money. And one of the key things in the bipartisan infrastructure law was not just this TICTAC funding, but other sources of technical assistance to help smaller and disadvantaged communities apply for the funding. Because, you know, often you have to have like a full engineering plan before you're going to get funding to replace lead pipes or to build a new treatment plant or whatever. So when that technical assistance money disappears and is frozen, which we're getting reports that it largely has been, it's very hard for those smaller communities, disadvantaged communities, to compete and try to get that funding in the future. So even where theoretically the state revolving fund money might be available, if you don't have the technical assistance to put together an application that can be approved, it doesn't matter that theoretically that money might be available. So that's an ongoing issue as well. And we're definitely hearing that from some folks in the frontline communities.
All right, well, I think we have run out of questions. I'll give a couple more seconds for anyone who might be currently typing, but I just want to thank everybody again for participating and sharing all of your knowledge with us. I think this is really helpful for equipping congressional offices that care about clean drinking water to fight back against a lot of what's happening. And I just want to encourage all the panelists, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office and Rep. Dingell's office. And, we've got a good group of attendee offices here today. Share whatever information you want, make whatever requests of us that you need. We're here to try to protect clean water and to get the lead out. So I really appreciate it. And it looks like we don't have any more questions.
Well, can I make a final pitch?
Yeah.
My final pitch is if your boss has a good relationship with a Republican, pulling them aside and saying, hey, this idea of doing a CRA on the lead and copper rule is insane, and you really ought to talk to your leadership about not doing it. I think that would be great. Nobody wants to see this rule. Hopefully nobody wants to see this rule repealed, but all we need is a handful of Republicans to quietly tell the leadership that this shouldn't come up, and hopefully that would be enough to keep it from coming forward. So
I'm just going to reiterate how
that.
insane the CRA is insane. Like, it is literally like, preventing a future of healthy people. Like, it's if we care about global competitiveness and national, you can't hear me? I'm just saying the CRA is insane. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It took we've known about the evils of lead and water for 150 years. It took us 30 years to get a better rule and to ensure a future that is, not going to be protected. It just is madness. It's unbelievable. It can't happen.
So with that call to action, I just want to thank everybody again. Thank all the attendees. I'll be sending a recap email with links, and panelists, feel free to let me know anything that you'd like me to share with attendees. Happy to send slides or links or anything else. But thanks everybody for attending and participating. And I think this was a really good, productive discussion. So thanks everybody.
Thanks, Andy.